Hello and good morning to our listeners from around the world, and welcome to a special edition of This Morning with Soulivity. My name is Brian Wesley Johnson, and I'm so glad you're here with us for today's tribute to the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, an American hero. Here in America, we celebrate every third Monday of January each year for a national holiday to celebrate his birthday. So, for the next hour is all about creating the space for all of us, including you, our listeners, to have a real conversation about the meaning of his life and what he believed and taught all of us towards a world of unity, love, compassion, and freedom. And I am so glad I am joined today by a very special panel of friends and Soulivity TV hosts and collaborators. There's D'Angelo Thompson, Sheila Applegate, Teresa Greco, Tammy Gaines, and Dr. Chanel Guzman on the line. So welcome, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
morning. Welcome.
Happy to be here today.
Oh man, this is going to be great. And listen, for all of you that are listening in today, before we begin, we definitely want this to be an interactive conversation. Please comment, ask questions, give us your thoughts about this particular show and what the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. meant to you. We're going to be playing clips throughout the show as well from the WPA Library, one of the world's largest and most diverse libraries in the film industry. So we're so glad that they provided these clips. So everyone, why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm going to start with this first clip of a young Martin Luther King. It's approximately 1960-61, and he is talking about the famous quote I think that everybody knows outside of the I Have a Dream speech, where he's talking about injustice
everywhere. For those who say to me, stick to civil rights, I have another answer. That is that I've fought too long and too hard now against segregated public accommodations to end up segregating my moral concerns. I'm not going to do that. Others can do what they want to do. That's their business. Other civil rights leaders, for various reasons, refuse or can't take a stand or have to go along with the administration. That's their business. But I must say tonight that I know that justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Whew, get chills every time I hear that. D'Angelo, I'm going to go to you first. I know you're a student of history and continue to be a student of history, and I know we've had conversations off and on about Dr. Martin Luther King, and I know him and his legacy means a lot to you. What are your thoughts, given this particular year, this particular times that's going on in the world, in the United States, and different communities?
Well, Brian, as you know, I'm all about human rights, and not only in the US, but around the world. And listening to that portion of the speech reminds me injustice. There's been so much injustice that I've observed as of late. Definitely George Floyd and post-George Floyd, Keenan Anderson that just happened in LA. So my eyes are always open, not because I'm a man of color, just because I'm a human being. So I think we always have to be aware.
Wow. George Floyd. Wow. That kind of sums it up, right? I mean, the power of television once again, where incidences like Selma and even the March on Washington, television played a role. And here's this video of George Floyd being murdered in front of everybody that brings back that notion of injustice. Does anyone else have any thoughts about this, Sheila or Teresa?
I've been thinking a lot on the same lines, I think, as you, D'Angelo. I feel that injustice is just not acceptable. And as you were saying too, Brian, it's just so obvious in our world, even more so in the last few years because of the access to the videos live and things like that, and how television did play a part in it. And now it's amplified and getting stronger. And then I like to look back at how Martin Luther King was such an inspired person who really, I think, when in his speeches, he's speaking beyond time in the sense that he's speaking a universal truth that pours inward to us and continues to grow. So the quote of Martin Luther King Jr. that is in my heart today is the arc of moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And that's what I have to keep in my heart to keep the strength and the inspiration that we are moving in the right direction.
Wow. Teresa, what about you?
I just wanted to say that what hit a chord for me in that particular clip was, that last line, that an injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, or rather something like that, to that effect. And that he's not, he's referring to all injustices, that there are so many different forms of injustice that I see all the time, on the news, on social media, that I just feel like we're inundated with different forms of injustice that continue on, and that people are sensitive about, or are working towards correcting. And that it's unfortunate, but it seems like it's something that plagues humanity over and over and over. And will we ever get to a point where we're not we don't have to remind ourselves of the work that we have to do to try to try to write it? And that will we ever come to a point where everything is just for everybody?
Wow. Tammy, what do you think about that? Do you
It,
think we'll get to a place? I mean, tell me what your thoughts are for the day first, and then maybe that's another discussion we can all have.
Yeah, so I always have so many thoughts on Martin Luther King Day for a couple of reasons. One is that, fun fact, my grandmother was one of the people that funded the early civil rights movement.
Right.
I think I told you that. So this day is really important because I watched her also fight to make it a holiday, but particularly to that clip. So he said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And, before there was ever George Floyd, remember there was Rodney King?
Yes.
Who got beaten on live TV?
Yes.
So that was when I was in business school, and I staged a giant rally. Like, we got thousands of people to come out, and we had cameras, like the media was there. The mayor showed up. It reminds me that we have to protest in whatever way possible against injustice. And I know everyone's at different stages in their life. People have different time commitments, but there's a lot of ways to protest. You don't have to hold up a sign and walk down the street. You could choose to not shop at certain establishments. You could choose to not watch certain shows. You could just live your life in a way that it's a protest against injustice, whatever that injustice may be. So that's what came to me when I saw that clip.
Wow. Do you think that everyone, this is a question for everyone before we go to our break. Do you each of you feel like this is going to be an ongoing process where it's more of a journey, or do you think that we'll get to a place at which a lot of the things that Dr. Martin Luther King talked about become realized, and then we'll pivot from that point? And I'll open it up to anybody.
Yeah, Brian, I'll go. This is Dr. Chanel.
Yeah.
I definitely think it's going to be an evolutionary journey because if you think about the number of years that it's taken us to get to his impact in his life, I think I don't know, you and D'Angelo might be able to better quantify, but let's call it 400 years. And so now we're in this new phase, of desegregation and civil rights, which is only, I don't know, 40 years. So when you think about the ingrained systemic, bias and stereotype and how we see each other, which leads to how we treat each other, then I think we definitely are in a long haul journey.
Yeah.
And it's, like having conversations like this that raise the awareness of how we see each other and how we treat each other continues to turn the tide, but we have a considerably long ways to go based on where we've come from.
D'Angelo, what do you think about that?
I agree with Dr. Chanel and with Sheila that it's going to take time. And I think about the book, The New Earth, right? I think there's such a transition that's happening now. That's why there's so much contrast at this moment, not only in our country, but around the world. So it's going to take time, decades, I believe.
Wow. Anyone else have thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's important that all of this does become unearthed, that unfortunately all of this that's come doesn't have to come to the surface in order for it to be cleared. And, on a soul level, some people have sacrificed themselves for these injustices to come to the surface so that we can look at it in the face, that if we continue to put it under the rug or into the closet, none of this gets solved. And so unfortunately it does have to bubble up to the top and rear its ugly face so that the masses begin to see what's actually happening underneath, in maybe in the deeper layers, so that it can be cleared and we can move forward.
Brian, if I could jump in real quick.
Absolutely.
I am optimistic about the future. I agree with everyone that it's going to take time.
Yeah.
But I'm extremely optimistic because I see how aware and engaged my kids are in certain issues.
Wow.
All of them have a clothesline of human justice. And they were laughing. I was telling them about the protest that I staged, which ended up being like a nightmare because he was on drugs or whatever. But I told them the rally cry was justice for King is justice for all. It's the same as what Martin Luther King said. And these guys are so tuned in to what's wrong in the world. I don't care how long it takes as long as we can achieve Dr. King's vision. And I'm starting to see it, come up in my kids and their friends. Those guys are all about serious issues that have to do with equality. And I think that's encouraging.
Yeah. This next generation is incredible. Dr. Chanel?
Yeah, Brian, I was just going to say to Tammy's point, I wonder, how do we continue to heighten the awareness when a lot of times today is a significant day. And so, of course, there's heightened awareness. There might be some more heightened awareness next month for Black History Month, and then again for Juneteenth. And my question then would be, how do we maintain and sustain the awareness outside of these three markers on the calendar?
That is a very, very good question. So why don't I'm going to play this one clip. It's a clip. It's a little longer clip. It's about 4 minutes. And then we'll take a break and then we'll come back. And then I'll have you ask that question again and we can go into discussion about that.
Okay.
This next clip is it's before the March on Washington. It's actually Martin Luther King talking about the announcement of it. So check this out, everybody.
Now, the other thing that we must see about this struggle is that by and large it has been a nonviolent struggle. Let nobody make you feel that those who are engaged or who are engaging in the demonstrations in communities all across the South are resorting to violence. These are few in number. But we've come to see the power of nonviolence. We've come to see that this method is not a weak method. For it's the strong man who can stand up amid opposition, who can stand up amid violence being inflicted upon him and not retaliate with violence. You see, this method has a way of disarming the opponent. It exposes his moral defenses. It weakens his morale, and at the same time, it works on his conscience. And he just doesn't know what to do. If he doesn't beat you, wonderful. If he beats you, you develop the quiet courage of accepting blows without retaliating. If he doesn't put you in jail, wonderful. Nobody within his sense likes to go to jail. But if he puts you in jail, you go in that jail and transform it from a dungeon of shame to a haven of freedom and human dignity. Even if he tries to kill you, you develop the inner conviction that there are some things so dear, some things so precious, some things so eternally true that they are worth dying for. And I submit to you that if a man has not discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live. This method has wrought wonders as a result of the nonviolent freedom ride movement. Segregation in public transportation has almost passed away absolutely in the South. As a result of the sit-in movement at lunch counters, more than 285 cities have now integrated their lunch counters in the South. I say to you, there's power in this method. And so if you want to help us in Alabama and Mississippi and over the South, do all that you can to get rid of the problem here. And then we also need your support in order to get the civil rights bill that the president is offering passed. And that's a reality. Let's not fool ourselves. This bill isn't going to get through if we don't put some work in it and some determined pressure. And this is why I've said that in order to get this bill through, we've got to rouse the conscience of the nation, and we ought to march to Washington more than 100,000 in order.
And we'll be right back with more from our special tribute to the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King in 60 seconds.
Have you ever asked the question, if I was to be anything, what would I be? Regardless of money, regardless of status, beyond popularity and fame, living your passion, feeling your life has purpose. Soulivity is a space to nurture that which lives in all of us. A place where work can become play, and doing what we love creates the dreams of a lifetime.
And we are back with more of This Morning with Soulivity, our special tribute to the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We're glad that all of you are here. Dr. Chanel, you had a great question for all of us at the end of the last segment. Why don't we start with that question?
Perfect. Just to give the context again, I believe Tammy was speaking of the optimism she had, especially seeing her kids so involved in perhaps our young generation around, civil rights and equity and justice. And so my question was, and just what Dr. Martin Luther King just said, how do we rouse the consciousness, or how do we sustain the heightened awareness around injustice and equity outside of a day like today, where everyone is, focused on it? And then we have Black History Month next month, and we have Juneteenth in June. How do we, out of those three markers, how do we sustain the heightened awareness around these issues?
Who wants to take that?
It's such an interesting question. So part of me feels like, I don't know how you all feel. Why do we have to have a holiday to celebrate what we are every day? Like, part of me drives me crazy, and part of me is like, this is a shame, like, but it's necessary, I guess. So, Doctor, tell me what you think about this. I feel like sustaining this feeling that we're having today is about our generation, not the younger generation. Because, like I said, they're just very aware. They teach social justice in school. My daughter's in high school. They protest all the time about all sorts of things. I think maybe it's us. Like, why are we complacent when injustice is still, it still exists? So I'll put that out to the team. Like, yeah, why are we? I do think it's us. It's our age group.
Tammy, I agree with you with that. I think, which is a wonderful thing, right? I think it shows that it will progress beyond what we can imagine. Even though part of us imagines where we want to be, there's that kind of tired part of us that is forgetting that, or coming from, I guess it shows how much we've changed in the single generation, and the generation even from Dr. King. So if we keep remembering, every generation takes things exponentially. And for me, and for people who look like me, I think that for me, it's sustaining it is making a conscious effort every day to, or, on a regular basis, to read or watch, or give myself more information, more arts from the Black community, and to just learn about systemic racism, which is the next phase. So it's just a constant, we have to make a choice to keep going. And I think that has to do with people who look like me, who are in advantage from the systemic racism.
D'Angelo, you had something that you wanted to say about this.
Yes, I think days like today is just a reminder, and also every day we have to be conscious of it, right? We have to be conscious of how we think, how we react to things, how proactive we are. So many things. And also I'll say to Tammy, like, yeah, bringing in a younger generation's voice. I wish someone younger was on this, like, let's say 18, between 16 and 18, to talk on their behalf as well.
She's still in the bed, D'Angelo.
Okay.
She is knocked out.
Being a professor, it's I talk to 20-year-olds, and it's just interesting to hear their point of view. And I always say to them, this is an exchange. Like, I'm sharing things with you, but I want to hear what you have to say. And I can honestly say there are moments I get so emotional because they really are more evolved.
Wow. Teresa, you had something.
And being an educator and a parent myself, that, children come into this world as empty slates. The world gets their grimy hands into us and has us then believing certain things about ourselves and the world, and that the belief systems that we have are ones that have been passed down to us from
Right.
often well-meaning people, educators, spiritual leaders, parents, friends, colleagues, all of these different things. And we have to be so aware of what messaging are we passing down to these blank slates. And unfortunately, there are a lot of jaded individuals that will pass down messaging that isn't optimistic, isn't the type of ideas that that maybe they innately have too, because they come into this world loving, at peace and happy. And we ruin that by telling them, oh, you're never going to be able to do that because of what religion you are, what clothes you have on, what city you're born in, what economic status you have. Like, lots of different limitations are put on people. And unfortunately, when you're really young, it's like a sponge. You just take all of this in. And so I think that it's so important that we as adults, that if you are jaded, if you're thinking, oh no, like nothing has changed, nothing will ever change, well, that's wholly the wrong messaging that we want to be
Right.
imparting to them, that things will never change, and it's been like this, from the very beginning, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I think that as adults, we have to be really careful about, what messaging are you imparting, because those things become belief systems, and we don't want to disempower our young people that are coming into and onto the planet on a soul level, that they're here to start making a difference. That, my understanding is that we have made a mess of the planet in a variety of different ways, and that it has actually given these new young people something to do. They
Right.
are coming to Earth saying, oh yeah, I'm going to make a difference here.
Right.
And that their sole mission is to do that. So we have to ensure that we're not disempowering them through our words and actions.
Right. I would love to pull this thread a little bit, right? Teresa, as you were talking about this, I want people to understand that this goes beyond like implicit bias. There was a study. I'm sure D'Angelo, you know this, because I think we talked about this at one point. There was a 40-year longitudinal study about how children respond to images of color. So I'll give you for instance, back in the late 60s, when they started this study, they had pictures. They had like 6 pictures of the same identical graphical image of a little girl. And the only thing that changed was the color of that girl's skin. And it went from white to dark. And they would ask the children, who is the good child? Who is the smart child? Who is the bad child? And so on and so on and so on. And in the 60s, late 60s, when they first did the study, all the correlation was negative. More negative characteristics were associated to the darker skinned children, and the lighter skinned children had more positive characteristics. This was even true amongst African American children, how they perceived themselves. 40 years later, basically the correlations were the same, except that Black children had less of a negative connotation toward the skin color, and it had moved to more of a neutral set. So there's studies that are here, there's evidence that we have that proves that exactly what Teresa and some of the other from our other hosts have been talking about, that we have to move beyond how we socialize our children to believe, as well as something I think, Tammy, you brought this up, and that is, listen, what's our community? What do our communities look like, right? Do children get a chance to play with each other and interact with each other? Because that bears a lot around what they're going to believe and as they get older. Listen, we're going to hold it right here, but I have another important clip. I think that kind of like talks about this. It's from Dr. Martin Luther King's famous I Have a Dream speech. Of course, we could not do today with at least a little bit of that, right? And so I'm going to play this. We're going to take a break and we're going to come back. And then we're going to pull this thread a little bit more on this idea of what are the ideas? What ideas and what are the ways that we can move our society forward using Martin Luther King's principle and legacy?
At this time, I have the honor to present to you the moral leader of our nation. I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital.
And so, everybody, we'll be back in more of our special tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King in 60 seconds.
Hi there, Sheila Applegate here with some exciting news. I've joined the incredible Soulivity team as the host of the new Consciously Awesome live show, where I will be sharing insights to help you discover your full brilliance and claim the vibrant life you deserve. So tune in every Wednesday right here on Soulivity TV to join the fun, and remember to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss a single episode. Have an awesome week, and I will see you on Wednesday.
And hello and welcome, everybody. We are back with more of our special tribute to honor the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King here on This Morning. D'Angelo, you had something important that you wanted to say.
Yes, I was listening to the comments earlier, and I was born in the South, rural Mississippi, grew up in Chicago, lived in New York, LA, and San Francisco. So I've had a chance to really see a lot of the country, and I've always been engaged in every part of the community. So my friend circle is very diverse. That said, I do notice something. Let's call it a Friends episode. Let's call it Seinfeld, where people can live in cities like New York City and still have an insular existence where they don't have diverse friends. And how do we speak to that? How do we open people up to have more diverse circles and diverse interactions? I know Tammy mentioned something. I don't know if she wants to share, but I would love to hear her point of view about it.
Thanks, D'Angelo. Yeah, I was sharing privately that as inspiring as today always is every single year, it also makes me really sad.
Yeah.
Because I experience racism at least once a week. And sometimes it's obviously unintentional, it's ignorant. And sometimes it's like, wow, these people like really like I went to a store with my daughter this past weekend, and I asked the woman if this jumpsuit comes in a size 6. And she was like, that's $240. I didn't ask you that.
Wow.
I didn't ask you that.
Right.
I asked you if it came in a size 6. And that happens. I want to hear your all experiences. That happens to me all the time. So today makes me sad because it's 2023, and like, how much has changed? I'm not really sure.
Well, I know, Sheila, you have something, but I'll just do a personal share before we go to you, Sheila. I know in my professional life, large 14, Fortune 500, 1,000 companies where I would be the only chocolate chip at my level in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember many, many times at which I would be leading a major project and I would be getting this quote unquote extra help. Right? Been doing this thing for 25 years, 30 years, but my colleagues, they would never get the extra help. I'm doing air quotes. And it was like I always had someone looking over my shoulder, checking on, making sure that I was doing what they thought I was supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And and then we'd win deals and all this kind of stuff, and it had nothing to do with that. It always came back to just my competence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was happening a lot, and not in my world and professional world. But Sheila, you had some things that you wanted to share.
I actually think you should keep going with this topic if they want to share. I think it's more important.
Yeah. Dr. Chanel?
Yeah, I can share, Brian. Somewhat in the business world, there is a sentiment: people do business with those they know, like, and trust. And so you'll find that as established as circles are and boardrooms are, people continue to feel comfortable around people who look and espouse similar values. And so, yes, I am often, because I'm in a sales environment, meaning as a business owner, I am a sales professional. So even in my sales trainings, when we have receptions or I go on major conventions and there's, a private reception, yeah, I can, as soon as I walk in the door, my instant scan is, okay, how many of us are here? Us, meaning I'm a person of color. How many people are here? And it doesn't bother me anymore, but it's certainly something that I take note of. And I've also now gotten to the point where I will bring it up to, organizers to say, hey, I'm okay with this in terms of I'm comfortable now because it's been a case for so long. But maybe you might want to be thinking about how do we increase the diversity in this room so that there's not just 5 of us out of a group of 100. So I continue to experience that on a regular basis.
Teresa, you had something you wanted to share?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I think it's so important for people of color to share these experiences that you have on a daily basis, that even the small, subtle situations that occur that, I think it is a lot of ignorance that, I'm also a white person and we're not familiar with some of these biases, or certain comments that are made, or certain actions that are done because of the color of your skin, that I think it's important for you to speak out about it, that it doesn't have to be really big situations like what happened with George Floyd to make, headlines. That I think it's important that you speak out about these things, because most people, other people are not experiencing these type of comments or actions, in that it's all about awareness, that until we become more consciously aware of what's happening, and this type of dialogue happens between people, can we become more educated about what's really happening. That, again, people maybe want to put it under the rug and say, oh, that stuff doesn't happen anymore. Well, it is happening. And Tammy said it happens at least once a week to her. And that's not okay. None of these things are okay. And for it to be happening, often, weekly, maybe daily in some situations. And I think until we become more aware of it, again, until that this ugliness comes to the top, only then can it be cleared. And I think that those that are empathetic to the situation and want to genuinely make changes can't make those changes unless they know what type of belief systems they're operating under. And I think that this type of dialogue is important, so that we can become aware of what type of thoughts and actions and belief systems are floating around, so that we can make changes.
I think it's our responsibility at this point to make that, as people not of color, just to say, I mean, I respect what you said, Teresa, and it's important to hear this, but I think we need to take, I feel like I need to take responsibility for not ask people of
No,
color to do more.
for them to share, I'm saying that they need to share their experiences. They need to be vocal about it. They need to use social media. They need to speak about it, instead of just oh, that happened to me, and oh, that that's not fair, and that sucks. That we need, so when the George Floyd thing happened, in the US, I'm Canadian. And so there was, we were talking about it here, and there was, and then even with my work, we had an entire meeting where those on our team that are of color shared different stories. And I was floored. I was I can't believe that type of stuff is happening to you. I can't believe that people have the audacity to say those things to you. So it's not my reality, but when I hear that these things are actually happening, it impacts me. It saddens me tremendously. And it makes me more aware of the reality that people of color are still living. That we think, oh yeah, that happened a long time ago. No, it's still happening now. And only until do we hear the type of current stories that are happening can we become more aware of the fact that this stuff is still occurring.
Right. Dee, you had something you wanted to share.
Yes, guys, this is great. Thank you. I think we all have bias, right? We all have conscious bias and unconscious bias. We also are flawed, but I think we individually have to be conscious of how we walk through our lives. And I'll give a perfect example. When you're at dinner parties or with family, or that will make comments, and a lot of times we don't want to be confrontational, so we won't address it. I say address it. And I say address it. You can address it in a calm manner, but you need to let them know that it's not okay. I have a friend experiencing this often with her in-laws. She happens to be Latina. Her in-laws are white American, Italian, and they make comments to her. And I'm like, sweetheart, speak up, and also let them know it is not allowed in your home, period.
Right. I like that, Dee. Tammy, you had something you want to add as well?
Yeah, it was so I have such a unique perspective. I'm not sure if any of you have the same. I grew up in an all-white, really wealthy community. We were the only Black family for 4 towns, maybe
Wow.
5. So it's so interesting, the way we were raised. we experienced incredible racism, which seems like it was in our rearview mirror. I was 11 years old. They spray painted the N-word on our garage when we moved there. They did donuts on our lawn. So in talking to my friends, so this is 1979.
Mm-hmm.
They would say, like, what happened? I said they spray painted the N-word on our garage door. And they were like, oh my God. Some of them were like, oh my God, that's so terrible. And some of them were like, what does that mean? Like, what's the big deal? Just straight up sort of, that's why I keep going back to ignorance. But to what we were talking about before, I feel like I don't want to share any more of my experiences. If you really want to, and I'm not talking to you, Sheila, in particular, if you really want to understand what it looks like to walk in our shoes every single day, whether it's personally or in school with our kids or in the business world, just study history. Study history. Look at the heads of corporations. Like, why do they all look the same? Right? Like, why do they have, like, look at the history around people's views on quote unquote set aside programs, on quote unquote affirmative action. Like, this runs so deep historically.
Right. Yeah.
I'm tired. Like, I'm just sort of tired of like sharing my experience. I totally agree with D'Angelo. We should call people out, which I do. But at some point you have to be responsible for your own education around this whole conversation around race.
Right. You know, before we go to our next clip, you know, I had some, as you guys were all talking, I had some thoughts of my own, and I was thinking that first and foremost, I don't think there is one silver bullet for any of this. I think that D'Angelo, we got to call this stuff out when it happens and nip it in the bud. I think people shouldn't allow it in their own homes, but companies shouldn't allow it in their own companies. And they need to study too. But I'm reminded of a story my father said to me a long time ago about when he was a young man, married, going to school in the segregated South at one of the few four-year universities in the 60s that would actually graduate Black students from. This was beyond HBCUs, by the way. This was a white university that for the first time had ever had its first 4 or 5 Black students, and 2 of them were my parents. There was the message that there was going to be a cross burned on his lawn by the local Ku Klux Klan. And my father had to go outside, mow his lawn with his pistol in his jeans and his rifle strapped around his back to make sure that nothing happened to his family. Now, I look at that and I say, is it his responsibility to say to other people what they already know is happening in the community? Or is it the community and the people that are threatening him? Is it their responsibility to get aware and stop that, what I call madness, which affirms itself as racism? And so I have my answer. So all of you can kind of think about that as well. I want to go to this next clip because I think it's an important clip. It's something that kind of gets lost, and we can continue on this after the break if we want to. But I wanted to get to this one clip where it's from the March on Washington, and it's a part of the I Have a Dream speech that starts to connect economics with freedom for specifically Black people. And I thought that it was an appropriate piece because I think people don't know, or they forget, or they're ignorant of the fact that the March on Washington wasn't just for civil rights. It was also about economics and jobs as well. In fact, that's the complete title of the march. So we'll watch this clip, we'll do a break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk some more.
condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summit of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But that is something that I must say to my people.
Woo! I don't know about y'all, but I'm getting chills over here. That brother boy. Tammy, you had something that you wanted to say about this part of Martin Luther King's overall message, just not at the I Have a Dream, but this was a message that he had been talking about for a long time.
Yeah, it's very interesting. People overlook this whole piece where he talked about economics, and he talked about, like, you know, one of his best speeches that he ever gave was to the union workers,
right?
Which was strictly business. It wasn't about well, I guess it was about equality in its own way. But in general, I think there's two ways to look at this. One is, how do we economically empower our community personally? Like, what can you do personally? And the second piece is, what can we do as a global community, right? Of African Americans, African America, by the way. So from a personal standpoint, I do believe that economic empowerment is the great equalizer. And I read a study somewhere that if Black people had an extra $300 a month, they would be more highly engaged in everything from education to healthcare, like basically those things that make society work. So, in terms of a call to action, I would encourage everyone to do a side hustle. Ideally, something
Yeah.
around entrepreneurship,
Amen.
like have your own business. For a lot of reasons. One is, if you have your own business, you have a plan B. If your job doesn't work, there's tax write-offs, and it's extremely inspiring to make your own money from something that you came up with in your head. Second thing, Brian, really quick, is from a community standpoint. There's been these, after George Floyd, it was like, buy Black, support Black businesses, blah, 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 blah. That is so important. Excuse me, I did a speech a couple years ago on Martin Luther King Day on how many times our dollars bounce in our community versus other communities. So, for example, in the Asian community, their dollars change hands more than 9 times before they leave the Asian community.
Absolutely.
In the Latino community, dollars 6 times. They change hands 6 times. In the Black community, money circulates 1 time.
1 time. Yep.
So we take the money and we automatically go spend it in somebody else's community. So it's really important that we make sure the dollars are bouncing in our own community. That's going to lead to economic power. Like, Blacks have an estimated 1.3 trillion gross national income, but only 2% is recirculated in the Black community.
Wow.
We can start turning that around.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm going to go around the room with what people can think around this empowering call to action. Just one little piece that I want to share, Tammy, in terms of that. African Americans have spent more disposable income than any other group. So if we spent that disposable income within our community, it would be a great game changer. A great game changer. So thank you for that.
That's real power, right, Brian?
Yeah, it's real power. I mean, that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Chanel, I'll go to you first. Dr. Chanel, you on mute? Well, we'll come back to
My
Dr.
apologies. No,
no problem. No problem. Go ahead.
I mean, I was saying that your suggestion on economic empowerment through entrepreneurship is right where it's at. We need more, African Americans lead the nation in poverty, incarceration, recidivism, and we have the least amount of businesses. And so obviously the disparity exists. So if we had more business and more ownership, we could take those dollars and invest them in our community to solve some of our problems. And then just real quick, Brian, the second suggestion is for people who have not put themselves in positions where they are the quote unquote, the minority in the room, you might give that a try so that you can experience and have perhaps some empathy for those of us who trailblaze in rooms where we're the only one. Somebody told me as a suggestion of that's what they do. So they're Caucasian. And so they go to an all African American church, or they go to a community center centered around African American issues where they're the only one in the room. And it really opened their eyes and gave them an experiential viewpoint of the dynamic of majority and non-majority. So you might give that a try as a call to action.
Thank you for that. Sheila?
Well, Dr. Chanel, I want to say I completely agree with that, and I do make a conscious effort for that experience, and in doing that, I think I recommend it for everyone too, because it's so important for people who are, like I said, who are people who are being rewarded by the systematic racism, whether we think we're racist or not, we are, and we need to find within ourselves what is unnoticed and to experience that, and to make an effort to step out of this division that is naturally in our lives.
Thank you for that. Teresa?
I would like to share a quote from his Nobel Peace Prize speech that I just thought was so beautiful. And so I know we're at the end of the show, and so I don't know if this is a good quote. I feel like it's a good quote to end our discussion on, but
Yeah, go for it.
I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. And I would love to believe that if we could live more from a place of love, and that we are all innately love, peace, and happiness. And if we could remember the truth of who we are, that we wouldn't have to have discussions like this, because when you are acting from a place of love, then a lot of these things wouldn't happen. And that if we could just love each other unconditionally, love the differences, love what makes us unique and special, rather than it dividing and separating us, we would just have a different world,
Mm,
a
Thank
different
you for that.
reality.
Thank you for that. That's beautiful. D'Angelo?
One word comes to me is do.
Hmm.
Be
Mm.
proactive. What everyone said, economically, I lived in Manhattan and I just moved to Brooklyn for many reasons, but the main reason was I was tired of seeing these huge stores and nothing was personalized. So many small businesses are closed in Manhattan. So I said, you know what? I'm going to live in an area where I see diversity. I see a lot of businesses, like the wine shop is owned by a person of color. Across the street, another wine shop owned by a gay man. Up the street, an Asian family owns a cleaner. So I'm circulating money within the community. So my point is, do.
Mm. Mm. Um, I'll take the liberty of going last. um, I agree with everyone. Again, I want to say that it's a message and a call to action of doing everything that everyone has said. Um, Having had parents that were active in the civil rights movement, like Tammy, like your ancestors, um, there's one very important piece that goes along with, be the change that you want to see, and that is, folks, we got to vote. It irks me seeing the numbers every single election, may it be a midterm, a local election, a national election, a statewide election, where we are, as a community, are not showing up, as well as other communities that believe in freedom and equality are not showing up. That's about being the change you want to see. And there's a lot of things just politically that could change by just a few percentage points around our nation. And so please honor the legacy and the lives of our ancestors that bled and sometimes died for that precious right. You got to get out there. You have to use it. That is your voice as a citizen. So make sure you're registered. Make sure you vote for every doggone thing. Everything. I don't know of any one of my grandparents that missed an election. They were there for all of it because they understood how important it is. Um, Listen, I know we're a little bit over time. I think that it was appropriate that we were over time. Um, my cup runneth over again with this show, where all of you, my friends, my colleagues, my collaborators, your voices were necessary today. So I just want to first say a special thanks to D'Angelo Thompson, Sheila Applegate, Teresa Greco, Tammy Gaines, and Dr. Chanel de Guzman for your voice today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, but before we go, I want to end the show off with one last clip, and this will be the last clip that we'll show. But I just want to say, on behalf of all of us here at Soulivity.com, thank you for joining this special episode, honoring the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. We hope that you will come back and join us every weekday at 8 a.m. for more great conversations that are real, that empower you. We'll be rebroadcasting this episode again at 11 a.m. So if you missed some of this, you'll be able to see all of it again on social media. And so as we go to this next clip, I just want to say, until next time, keep having real conversations with passion and purpose, and create a life full of high quality living today. We'll see you next time.
An inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. The rich man can never be what he ought to be until the poor man is what he ought to be. John Donne caught it years ago and placed it in graphic terms. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. And then he goes on toward the end to say, any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. Therefore never sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee, that I oppose.
This work is subject to copyright owned by Affinity Global LLC. Any reproduction or republication of all or part of this is expressly prohibited unless Affinity Global LLC has explicitly granted its prior written consent. All other rights reserved.